I'm Sally Wheeler. I'm a Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at ANU for International Strategy and also Dean of the ANU College of Law. And it's great to see so many people from across campus, from different disciplines here today, and I'd like to thank everyone for braving the weather. That's probably the most important thing. Shortly you'll hear from Mr. Ed O'Daly from ANU Communications and Engagement Division. Ed and his team are a wonderful source of support for any of you who want to engage more with the world outside of ANU. They provide training, support, prep, including writing to write media releases, place opinion pieces, give media interviews. And then we'll pass over to Misha Ketchell. Misha has been an editor and journalist for more than 25 years. He's currently the Conversations editor and executive director. He will guide you through the process of pitching to the conversation and the benefits of doing so. I'd also like to introduce Lisa Watts, who's in attendance this afternoon. Lisa is Chief Executive of the Conversation Media Group, Chief Executive Officer, and although she's not presenting today, I'd encourage you all to say hello to her after this event. I'm sure both Ed and Misha will tell you the conversation has been an excellent way for the ANU to engage with those inside and outside of academia. When I looked at the conversation today, I saw that the first ANU affiliated article was published 10 years ago tomorrow, in fact, and it looked at the ethics of the carbon tax debate. Last year, ANU's readership increased by almost 11% to 14 million. That included the conversation's top 2 articles of 2020, and it's probably no surprise that both of those focused on COVID-19. They were both read 1.5 million times. That's a lot of reads. And I think that highlights for all of us the importance of ensuring that the work we do in a university is available in a timely, accessible and understandable way for people outside of academia. We are Australia's national university. The work we do is for Australia. If the work we do is only available in traditional, peer-reviewed, paywalled academic journals, then we are, I think, missing an enormous opportunity to engage with people outside of the world of the universities. Beyond our particular mission and strategic goals, it's important for us as individual academics to do that. Increasingly, we all look to progress in our careers. We're evaluated on more than our H-index and our CELT scores. We need to be aware of altmetrics, Twitter followers, media engagement. The information that Misha passes on today will be invaluable to everyone, I think, in that respect. Being able to concisely pitch your research in an engaging way to a broad audience is a really important skill. I do have some minor housekeeping before we begin. If you've got any devices with you, if you could put those on silent, I'd be very grateful. We've arranged for this talk to be recorded. In the coming days, we'll distribute a link along with some flyers and a copy of Misha's presentation for those of you who are interested. You'll also be delighted to hear, no doubt, that in view of the weather, we're no longer planning drinks on the lawns, instead of which they're coming to you here in this room, drinks and canapes after the event. So now I'm going to pass over to Ed O'Daly. Many of you already know Ed. Ed is the director of the newly renamed ANU Communications and Engagement Division. Ed is behind their new ACE acronym, so you know he's good at his job.
Yep, thank you, Sally. You've stolen my thunder with the acronym gag, but that's all right. Yeah. So yeah, as I was saying, as I said, we were formed out of the recent change process, renamed from, I think, the unusual and unique to ANU SCAPA. So we're formed out of an independent review of communications and public affairs, and we got some really heavy hitters to help form that. So we had my opposite number at Cambridge University, some senior people from ABC, a very senior ANU professor, and colleagues from industry as well who worked in media, communications, political advice. So we're definitely building what we want to be for the future. We're much more digital, and we're going to get even more digital as we go forward. They recommended we become digital first, and so we're going to revamp our storytelling a lot this year. We'll be flipping the ANU Reporter from being a web version of a magazine to being an awesome website which happens to have a magazine attached. And that's, I think, actually quite a significant change, but it gives us a huge source of content to be putting out through all our channels over the next little while. So that's an exciting thing for this year. There's a lot of other stuff that my team does. We do internal communications, we run events, we have a multimedia team who have a studio that can do live crosses to media all over the world, and also help with the podcasting capacity that we have at ANU and the growing and expanding and excellent podcasting that we do here. We do photography, digital media, social media, corporate issues, finding experts, pitching out research. And the thing I'm here to talk about now is media. So ANU has a long-standing and proud tradition of engaging with the media. It's what we should be doing as part of our national mission, is to help bring expert insights to the national debate. And we enjoy one of the highest profiles of any university in Australia. We're consistently ranked in the top 3 through independent measurement of media coverage. I got the report this morning from our monitoring firm Icentia. Last year we had 115,000 items of media with an accumulated audience of 762 million. So ANU has a good reach through the media, and with a particularly small media team, that's really, really good. It's important that Australians get to understand the work we do at ANU. Part of our mission is to engage, is to explain the work we do, and media is an excellent way of doing that, and our team are able to help you do that. And it's also a very good way to build your own profile as a researcher, as an expert in your field, and particularly on topics of global significance. But in every area that is an interesting story, there's an opportunity for you to get up. And it even brings in dollars. I was talking to a researcher the other day about a new project she was working on. And she said, yeah, it was great. We got approached by this company because they read about me in the media. And she's now got a reasonably valuable 6-figure contract to do some work for an international tech company based on the fact they read about her in the media. So it is well worth doing. Now, my team, the media team within my team, looks after our day-to-day media. They do training. They do regular workshops in writing for non-academic audiences and how to do interviews. They can help prepare for interviews. And so as a crowd that obviously wants to engage and learn more, please do come along to the training. I think we'll circulate some information about the sort of help we can give you as well. So please do have a look at that. But today we're here to hear about the conversation. Now, this is the second university I've worked at, and I've been involved with the conversation since it was formed. It's an excellent platform to really bring together that sort of a source of independent academic expertise. And it's a great place for you guys to put your non-academic writing or your writing to a non-academic audience with support of expert editors who are going to help you steer what you have to say into language that people can really understand, that will resonate with a general audience. And it's a great way to help amplify the media work you're already doing. Often we'll find that one of the channels through which a media release goes through is through an article that the researcher does in the conversation, which is a great way to boost that reach. And also things in the conversation get picked up by wider media as well. So you're not just writing for the conversation, you're writing for all the places it gets syndicated, and for the certainly ABC radio producers across the country who get up in the morning and read the conversation to find out what they're going to fill their drive shows with. So it is really, really worth doing. So if you have something you want to say, I encourage you to reach out to my team, to the conversation team, and come to some training. Misha.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Ed. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today as well. I think it's a very important thing always to do. I guess the thing that you probably most want to hear from me is how you think about pitching and how you think about getting your messages into the media. And to think about that, I actually want to start, given that we're in a moot court today, with an old barrister's trick. Barristers have got this rule, which is that if you want to tell somebody something, what you do is you tell them what you're going to say, you say it, and then you tell them what you said. And that's a really good way of getting a message across really clearly. So I can tell you in 2 sentences, actually in 3 sentences, the key things I'm going to say today, and I'll start with them, and then I'll go through and give you a bit more detail, and then we'll do a recap. But the 3 things I reckon that are most important that you take away from today, the first one will be there's always a hook. And what I mean by that is part of the work that we do at The Conversation is we find a way to build a bridge between the work that you're all doing as expert academics and public discourse. And the way that we do that is we look at the news agenda, we look at things that people are talking about already, things that people are interested in already, and we find ways of marrying that to the work that you're doing. And what we're going to talk a little bit about today is the ways in which you can find hooks for your work. You can find opportunities to pitch or to think about ways of making your work relevant to the public discourse and getting noticed that way. So that's the first thing, is always a hook. The second thing that I really want you to take away from this talk today is that you should never disembark a vehicle if you can get out of a car. And that actually comes from a terrific article I read in the New Yorker maybe about 15 years ago. And there was a journalist who was covering a court case, and he was describing a police officer who was giving evidence. And the journalist said he was the sort of person who would never get out of a car if he could disembark a vehicle. And it made me think about all those years when I was working at the Age newspaper in Melbourne, going to police press conferences and hearing police talk. And the way that people who, when you spoke to them, could use normal, everyday English language, but suddenly when you put the microphones on them, it would be, Mr. Smith proceeded in a westerly direction, as though anybody ever talks like that. And the way in which, interestingly, that language is so sort of alienating, so lacking in warmth, so dead, when in actual fact, what you want to really communicate effectively with a wide audience is a real sense of vividness, of humanity, of what's actually happening. So if you can just keep that little phrase in the back of your head, never disembark a vehicle if you can get out of a car, I think it'll be really helpful. The third thing I want you to take away from today is make sure that you work with your media team, with Ed and all the resources you've got here at ANU. ANU, as I understand it from an outsider, I don't know this as well as you all do, has a very specific mission as a national university. It is super engaged in public policy formation, the big debates of our times, and you've got really strong resources here that have got really good expertise to help you make sure that you achieve that engagement and that impact for your work. So I really would encourage you to do that. The other thing I'd say about engaging with a wider public is just that, generally speaking, our experience has been that it's fun. When the conversation started, and it's 10 years ago tomorrow, I'll never forget, we all sat in a room and we'd set up this new website and we'd ring up academics and we'd say, we've got this website that we're setting up, there's no audience, we can't pay you for what you write, but could you do me an article in a couple of hours for tomorrow morning's edition? And the number of people that actually said yes sort of astonished even me. I was like, I can't believe that people are agreeing to do this work. But very quickly it became clear that when people did write these articles for a broader public, they got picked up, they got talked about, they got media, they got asked by politicians to give submissions, they got research projects, they got funding. All of these wonderful things started to happen from this public communication. And so many of the people that did it in those early days and all the way through really got a sense of pleasure from that capacity to talk to a wider audience. And I always feel that in life, in any type of work you want to do, the only way you're going to be able to do it successfully is if you can make it fun and if you can really get some sort of pleasure from it. So I'd really encourage you to think about public engagement. I know that universities encourage it very strongly and it's very important, but I think you should also think about it as something that really you're doing for yourself, because it's something that can be really satisfying, it can be a great pleasure, and so many great things can sort of flow from it. I'm going to whip through these slides reasonably quickly. So, I'll just go back and just give you a little bit of background about the conversation. It was founded 10 years ago. The founder was a former Age editor by the name of Andrew Jaspin, and he sort of had this idea when he was working at Melbourne Uni, which was, what if you treated the university like a giant newsroom? What if you treated your law faculty the same way that you treat the desk that covers crime or legal issues or police matters in your newspaper newsroom? What if you treated the medical faculty the way you treat your health desk? And basically Andrew had this idea, which is that a university is like a giant newsroom, but rather than being stuffed by people who don't really know what they're talking about, it's staffed by experts who have actually spent their entire life developing deep expertise in particular topics. And his idea was, if we can unlock that expertise and inject it into public discourse, it can make a huge difference to the quality of our public discussion. At the time when the conversation was founded, I was actually working on Media Watch on ABC TV, and I was making a lot of enemies from people I used to work with, and I was spending a lot of the time on the phone to academics and people who really knew what they were talking about, who were saying, I've had a bad experience with the media, I've been misquoted, my work or my research has been twisted in some way, and I'm thinking of actually withdrawing from public discourse. I'm thinking I'm just going to stick to my knitting. And Andrew's idea of this giant newsroom from the university really appealed to me, because I thought, here's a way of actually working with academics and bringing them back into the public discourse. And the key thing that we did that was different was this rule that academics get final sign-off on every single article. So what we do is we pair professional journalists with academics to write the articles. And this came from an idea that was pitched by Peter Doherty, who said he was sick of being interviewed by reporters who sat across the desk from him and said, what about this, what about this, and then went away and wrote an article and got it all wrong. And he said, what if instead of having somebody who is adopting a combative approach, I had a journalist who was actually going to work with me and help me get my ideas across? And so the idea of the conversation is that we, academics pitch us article ideas. If your pitch is accepted, you will work with a professional editor, and that editor will help you with everything, finding images, finding links, thinking about angles, rewriting, research, everything to make the article as strong as it can possibly be. But at the end of the day, you are the experts. You're the people that know the topics. We don't. So we want to make sure that you have final sign-off so we don't get a single thing wrong. So every single word is correct. The picture is not misleading in some way. It's not defamatory. The headline's correct, so that you're entirely comfortable with what goes out there. The thing to be aware of is when you write an article with the conversation, in most cases you'll get media follow-up. So you'll get radio, TV, republishing. There will be other things that will happen as a result of that piece. And that's where you need to really work with your media team, because they'll be able to help you with things like negotiating radio interviews, TV interviews, and all those other things. But the idea of the conversation is that first bit of contact, that first bit of public work, you actually can get it out in a way where you've got control. And that's a really important thing where in so many other places in the media you don't have the control over your message. These are some of the benefits of publishing with us, and just bear with me, I'm going to get to the bits about how to actually craft a successful pitch, which I'm sure really is sort of the key focus of what I want to talk about. But it connects your research directly with the public. Editors help you translate the research. It's very fast publication times. That might be a benefit for some of you, it might not be, but sometimes we'll commission pieces and we'll expect them within very short time frames. Mark, what's probably the fastest you've been asked to write a piece?
2 hours.
2 hours, okay. So, and the reason we do that, just to explain, is you might remember I started off by saying there's always a hook. One of the things that we're trying to do is always look for a news hook for expertise. If a hook comes along, if you're an expert in something like, I don't know, employment law or sexual harassment, given what's going on in Canberra at the moment, and that topic, rises to the top. If we can publish an article within 2 hours, if we can be really, really quick, we can get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of readers for that piece, because everybody wants to know about it, and we can actually make a difference in terms of informing the public debate. So the reason for the speed is not just for the fun of it. It's actually about taking advantage of the hook for that content. The other benefits, authors can use the conversation metrics. I don't know how many of you have profiles on the conversation. Maybe we can do a quick show of hands. Has anybody written for us before or have a profile? Okay, that's good. There's a few people. Is everybody that hasn't written, does anybody have a profile that hasn't written? Okay. It's worth, one thing that would be great to do at the end of today is if you can all go away and set up a profile on the conversation. It's not very hard to do. You can just click a button to register your details, and it means if you do pitch something for us, it's much quicker. The other thing I'd recommend you do is we have a daily email that provides all the content that we're publishing every day from academics across the country. How many people get the email? Can I have a show of hands? Okay. It's maybe about a third of people. I'd really recommend, if you can, signing up to that email. It gives you a good sense of the types of things that we do and the types of things other academics are doing, which will give you a really good sense when you're pitching your own work about the types of things that will work. One of the other things that's really powerful with the conversation is traditionally in newspaper newsrooms, the whole model is about you get a story, and the key thing you want to do is you want to make sure that nobody steals that story from you. And the reason that really matters to you is because if you get on the front page, the editor might put a little bit of red type that says exclusive. whether or not it is another matter. But there's a whole sort of culture around keeping content to yourself within the competitive world of journalism. The conversation, because of its sort of funding model and its approach, we take the opposite approach. Everything that we publish is free to republish, and we work very actively with other media outlets, with the ABC, with the 9 Fairfax papers, with The Guardian, New York Times, Washington Post. In fact, there's more than 20,000 republishers. The advantage of that to you is that, again, if you write a piece for us and you want to get to a wide readership, it's a really powerful way of doing it. You could write an op-ed for the Sydney Morning Herald, for example, and I think their circulation is about 180,000, something like that, maybe 160 these days. It's sort of always changing. That op-ed might get read probably, if you measured it, 20, 30, 40,000 times once you take in sort of digital and print readership. We can often deliver a readership that's much greater through the power of this republication. The other thing that's different between the conversation and other media outlets is that we reach an international audience. We've got teams in the US, UK, Canada, Africa, France, Spain, Indonesia, New Zealand. So since the project was launched, a lot of other proponents have sort of developed TCs where they've got their own boards, their own editorial teams and their own university networks, and it's become one significant global network. That can be really important where a big part of your target audience is colleagues. So say, for example, you're wanting to put out a bit of research and say it's medical research. Medical research is global, right? So people are looking at it all over the world and other people in your area want to know about it. The fact that you can access this audience through this type of media engagement is quite significant and quite different to placing a story with the Australian domestic media. Yes, and the other thing just to mention is that some of the work that we do is republished into other languages. We're currently publishing in French, Spanish and Indonesian. Okay, I'm not going to dwell on this for too long because I think you sort of have got the picture. This is just giving you some sense of the scale of the audience. So when you include republication, it's around about 60 million reads a month to content through the global network. And the audience last year, through COVID, grew by about 70%, which is a really significant number. And it was really people like, ANU, for example, which had the top 2 pieces, the epidemiologists. That was a really, really strong piece of that success because increasingly people are looking to bona fide experts. I won't dwell on that. Just the key point is that it's just worth bearing in mind, although to some extent you will be addressing colleagues when you write in the conversation, our main reason to exist is to try to help you build a bridge with a non-academic audience. Okay. So this is a little bit about some of the consequences of publishing, and it's sort of very important to note. So 68% of authors are contacted by media. It's a pretty high number. 10% contacted by government, 20% for research collaboration, 14% for business collaboration. And you can get some sense of some of the other things that happen as a result of publishing too. We sort of collect these stories and sort of put them out from time to time. Oops. Okay. So yes, this is just a little bit about how the ANU did last year. We sort of touched on this, so I won't spend too much time on it. But ANU did have the 2 top articles. How long you're infectious when you have coronavirus. And this is just a little bit about our readership metrics, which is, again, something which makes us unique compared to other media outlets, which is, generally speaking, if you write something for a newspaper or magazine, you get a little bit of gruff communication from the editor, your piece will come out, and that's it. There might be some slightly unpleasant comments, there might be some positive feedback, but that's basically where it ends. One of the things that we try to do is provide a way of arming you with data about what's happening. Now, these are the institutional metrics, so these are at a sort of a higher level for a university as a whole, but we also provide dashboards for academics so you can see how widely your articles are being read. Okay, now here's the nitty-gritty. This is the bit about finding the hooks. There are 3 types of article that we run, and if you're pitching a piece to the conversation, you should really think about if it fits into one of those 3 types and how it fits in. The first type is new research. So really, by its definition, new research is news. In that new research is something that we didn't know previously. It's something that, if it's been in a top-tier journal, for example, it's probably quite significant, and it's something that readers will want to know about. So the one thing that we encourage you all to do is when you've got a piece of new research coming out in a journal, that's a time you should always think about pitching to the conversation. Now, not every piece of research that's published in a journal will make it. Not every piece of research will definitely be the right type of thing for a wide public audience. But whenever you've got new research coming out, you should always think about it. Some of our best read pieces have been new research. And as much as we like to think, because we're editors and we sort of sit in a room making all these educated guesses about what readers would want to read, that we know what we're doing, in actual fact, often the best ideas come from the university sector and come from academics who are pitching research that we never thought was something that we would be publishing. So always when you've got something coming out, pitch it. If you've got something coming out in a journal and it's embargoed, please try to pitch us a week or 2 before the embargo. And the reason for that is because the more time you give us, the better job we can do presenting your research. So if you've got some new research, say you're an economist, and it's got some graphs, it's got some quite complex data, we've got a data team that can do things like data visualizations, videos, social media. There are all sorts of ways we can dress up that content and present it for really diverse audiences, but we need time to work on that. So if you've got new research coming out, pitch it early. Try to let us know what you've got in terms of images, audio, video, any other elements that can help the storytelling, links, anything else that might be useful. But that's one really important type of work. So when you've got new research, it's a really good time to pitch.
Sorry, just a question on that.
Yep.
At what stage of, the journal article, past peer review, in peer review, already published?
Generally with the journal article where it's in the process, we actually try to coordinate with publication, the publication date of the journal. But that's not always the case. I always get this question, and my answer always really is I don't know the answer, because it depends on the university, the research team, the nature of the research. There are some times when you can do articles about what they're called is pre-publication prints. There are some times when you can write an article about some early research that actually hasn't made it to a peer-reviewed article yet, peer-reviewed journal article yet. But generally speaking, the issues around that are sort of ethical issues, and they're issues around whether the research is ready, whether it's accurate. And our view is that we're the journalists, so we come along at the end and we help dress your content for publication for a wide audience. But these are matters for you and your colleagues. So if you've got doubts about those sorts of questions, I would really encourage you to direct them to colleagues you're working with, co-authors, any senior colleagues that are overseeing the research, and also talk to your media teams as well, because they might have strategies or things around the release of that work. But it's not something that we're quite so well placed to sort of comment on, because it really can change. Okay, the second type of content you need to think about is content hooked off the news. And you can see today, we've got the Morrison government's response to sexual assault claims. I presume that academic would have a lot of expertise in that particular area. The example I often give, because I think it's a really interesting one, was when the Christchurch massacre happened. There was an academic in New Zealand who was an expert in far-right terrorism in New Zealand. We got that academic to publish that piece within, I think it was about 8 or 10 hours of that massacre. And that academic was interviewed in the space of about 2 or 3 days, about 50 or 60 times by media outlets all over the world, including CNN. And the reason was that he had information that was absolutely pertinent to something that was of global significance and had launched himself into the media at exactly the right time. And that's what I mean when I talk about sort of, there being a hook or thinking about a hook. When something's in the media and it relates to your area, it's a potential hook and you should be on high alert. The little things that will tell you if there's a potential article there are things like if you're reading a newspaper article or you're hearing something on TV or radio and you're thinking they've got it wrong, that's not quite true, my research says something different, that should set off a bell. That's really definitely when there's something to do, because there's nothing that readers love more than somebody coming along and saying, you thought it was this, but in actual fact, there are all these other things that you need to think about. Because it's really constructive, right? It's something that you sort of knew a bit about, but you want to know more about it, and the academic is giving you more. They're amplifying, they're correcting, they're sort of being a guide, they're providing something really valuable. So if you see something being reported in your area and it's not the full story, it's misleading, it's incorrect, always think about pitching. But also if you see something being reported in your area and you think there's something I could add, something I could throw into the mix, I've been doing some study on this, I've got something that's related in some way to this topic, that's when you should think about pitching. Now, we've got a team full of journalists. We sit in the office every day and we follow the media really closely. And when these things come out, we will go out and try to find you if you've got expertise in relevant issues. And again, we work through your media team. We'll send out what we call heads-up expert requests, where we might say, we're doing something today on Scott Morrison and sexual assault. We'd like an academic who can explain sexual assault laws, for example. And that will come out to you and you can respond to those things. But also, if you can keep an eye out for things in the media that relate to you, it's really going to be very effective. Sure, yeah.
Obviously, it depends on what exactly is happening in the news that things will get bumped, but twice I pitched something, well, once successful and twice unsuccessful because I was just told we're too full for the next 2 weeks. And so I'm just wondering how much is like forward planned and how much kind of space is left for things that are just popping up?
It depends. Like, it's sort of a moving feast, because what you do in the media is very opportunistic. Actually, as I mentioned before, the conversation turns 10 tomorrow, and I had a little write-off talking about our birthday that was all written to run tomorrow morning in the newsletter, and it's just been dumped because there's just too much news with Morrison and what's happening in Canberra today. So these sorts of little shuffles or dances of like, not doing this today, not doing that, they happen all the time. I know it can be frustrating. The flip side of it is that there's almost always another opportunity. So if you think about any sort of really significant piece of research that you're doing, the reason that you're doing it, presumably, is because it matters in some way. Like, it helps the public interest, it'll help people. There's always a significant reason behind any sort of academic research. And that reason, generally speaking, is not going to go away, it's not going to disappear. So if, for example, something in the news happens and something gets bumped or we reshuffle, as long as we've got sort of a good relationship and we're in discussion, you can sort of go back to those things as well. But yeah, look, it is very, it's sort of like agile, like you're making lots of decisions in the moment about what's going to work and what isn't, because what you're really trying to do is take advantage of all those opportunities as best you can. So it's there's often a bit of judgment, and there's not really a strict rule about how much is pre-planned and how much isn't. It depends a bit on the news cycle too. Okay, the third type of content that we publish is timeless content, and this content is what in magazines they call furniture, and basically it's a certain type of editorial product that is something that will be useful to readers, but it doesn't necessarily have a news hook. Does anybody read the Sydney Morning Herald Good Weekend magazine here? Yeah, people. Anybody ever read the Two of Us section? Okay, that's a classic piece of magazine furniture, right? Basically what it does, it's like an interview with two people that have been friends for a period of time and their lives are connected in some interesting way. It's basically a way of framing content so that readers will come at it and will find it interesting, and it can be about pretty much anything. The conversation has got quite a few types of what, in magazines you might call furniture or sort of that timeless content. We've got a series we run called Curious Kids. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's a 6 to 12-year-old child writes a question and an academic answers it. And it can be anything, it can be basic, like I think one we had from a child was, what happens to a spider if it gets sucked up in a vacuum cleaner, or why is the sky blue, or anything really. Often the questions are very basic, and often you can answer them really based on probably things you learned in your undergraduate degree, not even your PhD or your sort of high level studies. But it's a really nice way of practicing public communication and starting to, at a time when it's not timely and under time pressure, get involved with a bit of communication in a different style. So we often do call-outs for things like Curious Kids, and if you read our newsletter and you see what some of these products are, you can sometimes pitch your research or some of your ideas or your expertise to some of these products where you can actually really add some value. So we've got another one in our arts section which is called Friday Essay, where basically we just publish a longer piece that's around about 2,000 to 2,500 words, sometimes even a bit longer, and it's a bit more essayistic. It's got a bit of literary style. It's a bit more playful in the way it's written. So sometimes if you might have something that's a bit off pace, it's not like a straight news story, it's not a piece of new research, but it's something else that's quite interesting or discursive, you might be able to pitch it there. So that's the third type of thing to pitch. There's a full list somewhere. I think, Susan, you've got it, of all our editorial products currently. I always forget what they all are because there's quite a few that are running at any given moment in time. And sometimes you retire them after a while if you finish them. We used to do one called Monday's Medical Myths, where we would debunk, a health myth like, you lose most of your heat through your head or whatever it is. We'd examine all those sorts of sayings about popular health issues. But if you can get a handle on what some of those things are, it's a very good area to pitch to as well. So that's the expert request I mentioned. This goes to your media team, and basically it's a list of issues that are happening currently, and really we're calling for authors who might have relevant expertise who can help us. That Kylie Moore Gilbert one looks pretty challenging, actually. Okay, so when you come to the point where you're thinking of pitching an idea, the simplest and easiest way to do it is use the pitch page on our website. There's a button, and you basically say, yes, I'm ready to pitch. I'm an academic and I'm ready to pitch, because we only publish articles by academic authors. That's a key rule of our work. The pitch process will guide you through. There's some helpful tips there along the way. What we're looking for in a pitch is really just an explanation of what you've got to say and why it matters. Really, they're the two things. When somebody's reading an article online, they are milliseconds away from looking at an email or watching a cat video or doing something else. So when we're editing a piece of work, what we're trying to do is we're trying to grab the reader's attention at the beginning, and we're trying to make sure that it's so well written and so compelling that by the time you get to the end, you sort of didn't realise that you'd actually read all the way through. There wasn't a moment where you got bored or confused or thought about doing something else. To do that, you have to tell the reader very early on what the stakes are, why it matters. Why are you telling me this? Why do I care? And you have to understand that readers are callous, impatient, petulant, self-indulgent, juvenile. You have to ascribe to them every negative characteristic you can and still try to please them. That's probably the best way that you can really hone a piece that's going to win over and maintain the interest of a reader. So what we look for here is a very short 3 or 4 sentence pitch. What are the key things you're going to say? What's the piece about? And why does it matter? If your pitch is accepted, we then will get back to you with a brief. And the brief might be slightly longer. The brief might say, okay, you're thinking of writing this. I want you to have a couple of paragraphs explaining why this, a couple of paragraphs on what happened here, a little bit on this, a bit on this, and do you have any video, or do you have a graph, or do you have something else, right? So we'll give you a little bit of direction about what we want. But what we're trying to do is structure it so that it's very clear and simple for the reader. So first step is you pitch to us, and you've got to really try to tell us as clearly as possible. Then we'll give you a brief, and we'll negotiate that brief, and then you can write the article. Quite a few years ago, before I worked at The Conversation, I was editor of a small publication called Crikey, which some of you might have read. And when I worked at Crikey, I used to get up in the mornings, and it was very, very early, because we had a publication deadline of about 11:30 in the morning or 12 o'clock, because we decided to publish at lunchtime. Again, that was a window of opportunity idea. It was about catching people when they're having lunch, when they're at their desks, so they could read it then. And often I'd get up in the morning and I'd be trying to get academics to write pieces on topical issues, again, like the Morrison, sexual harassment stuff, for example. I'd ring up an academic and I'd say, can you write me a piece on this? And they'd say, oh, look, no, there's no way I could do it. I don't have time. And I'd say, okay, well, look, what are the 5 things that they're getting right or getting wrong? Can you just tell me this, and this? And they'd go, yeah, okay, this is what it is. And I'd say, okay, you've just written an article. Like, I've got the content now. That's all I need. Like, I've actually answered the questions I needed answered. I can write this up, send it back to you, and you can look at the pros, you can sign it off. And in actual fact, that's a really good way of getting out of the way of what some people have, which is an anxiety about writing. When you're writing a piece for publication for general public, you don't really need to write in that sense of literary style, elaborate metaphors, lots of quotes and obscure thinkers. What you need to do is just sketch out what you want to say, the key things that you want to say, because in an online environment, the conveying of information is very, very direct. And if you can sketch out what you want to say very quickly and clearly, all of the rest can fall into place. It's really, what are the 3 or 4 major things I want to say? Sure.
PhD candidates can pitch if they're writing in conjunction with a supervisor.
That's right. So we had to make a rule about who could write and who couldn't, and we wanted to only publish academics. But we couldn't work out where to draw that line. It's really complicated, and it becomes more complicated when you think about things about professional staff and non-professional staff and Indigenous knowledge and people who are co-authors who are non-academics from industry, and it gets very complicated. But the rule that we wrote for academics, just to try to make sure that we're dealing with people who actually know what they're talking about, is that the minimum level is you need to be in the latter stages of a PhD. And then sometimes people in the latter stages of a PhD are writing or co-authoring with a supervisor. We don't actually have a policy on that anymore. We used to encourage people to write with their supervisors, but there was a bit of pushback because some people argued that there was this thing in academia where more senior academics would take the credit for work of more junior academics. Some people are laughing, some people might know more about this than I do. But again, it was one of those things where, look, we're not experts in this area, and really it's probably not our business really to have a policy on that. That's really a matter between you and your supervisor and your colleagues. What we decided was just that we would have the rule that you've got to be doing, a PhD.
What's the rule about professional staff?
Professional staff can't write. You've got to be an academic. Yeah. It gets complicated because sometimes they're professional staff who are academics, but then they've moved into professional roles. It's very complicated. I often have to deal with these things at the margins. And look, we just try to be as common sense as we possibly can. Like, obviously, we're not trying to shut people out, but by the same token, we've established a whole brand and a whole, media model based on the idea of publishing academics. So we want to be strict about that. You can see that's the form there, which are the tips on pitching. So in one sentence, what will your articles say? Why do our readers need to know about this? And a little bit of that is, and also why should they care? Like, why does it matter to them? And what key points will you use to support your argument? Okay. So these are some questions to ask yourself before pitching. And this is really now we're at the level of you've decided to pitch, you've got a pitch, but to improve your chances of success, here are some of the things you can do. So what's the story? We've talked about that. Why should the reader care? We've talked about that. Why now is often really important. If you can say, for example, there was a piece pitched a few years ago when there was a lot of debate about, I've forgotten the word used for them. Those shark nets they use to make sure that, people don't get eaten by sharks? Is there another word for them? Just shark nets, anyway. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, drum lines. Anyway, yeah, there was a story about those, and there was a big political debate about it, and somebody had done some research on their effectiveness and said, I've got this research, and the government in, 2 weeks' time is going to make a decision on whether to keep using these things or not. That's super powerful. Because if you know that issue is in play right now, number one, you can time it. Number two, you know that it's going to get traction, you know that the media is going to be interested. So one of the things you really need to make sure that you're clear on, if it's relevant, is the why now question. Do I have good examples to explain what I'm writing about? One of the things that you can get sometimes in all forms of writing, in newspapers, in academic writing, is a tendency to talk in the abstract. You know, the GPQR is not as good as it used to be according to the blah, blah, blah. It's like, people need to know what you're actually talking about. You've got to talk in really concrete terms. If it's a policy about cars, you need to talk about cars. If it's a policy about sexual harassment, you need to talk about what sexual harassment is and what it means and how it actually affects human beings. You've got to change things from the abstract to the sort of physical, because people see things in pictures. So one of the things you might notice is people always talk, when they talk about the US government, they'll say the White House rather than the US government. And one of the reasons for that is because as a reader, instantly an image flows into your head. You've all seen an image of the White House, right? Like, so even though it's not the house that's actually talking, it gives you a visual element. It can sort of anchor your experience. Whereas if you're writing something and it's a blizzard of acronyms, there's nothing to actually picture, and the readers then have a really, really bad experience. So it's really useful to have really good concrete examples so that people can actually drill down to what is the key thing that we're talking about, what are we actually relating to. Why are you the person to write this? This is where, and I'm also bad at this, but everyone needs to do this. You need to be a bit boastful. You need to say, look, I've just spent 3 years studying this. I'm an expert in this. I know more about this than anybody else. It's really important to put your qualifications out there. And one of the things that we try to do at the conversation is make sure that we put the academics' qualifications both really up in lights next to the story, but also, as much as possible, if we can, we will try to work it into the story. Like if you can have a paragraph or two down something saying, you know, this person is the leading expert on this or has done this research on that, and obviously it's in their voice, so you change around a bit, but I mean, it's actually really useful because then readers go, okay, that's why I should read this person on this topic. That's why I should trust this person. That's why this is useful. I'm trying to think of an example the other day. Oh, yes, okay, so with the floods. We were commissioning on the floods and on Sunday. And there was an academic who had done some work on psychology of floods, so why people behave in certain ways when they're fleeing floods. But this person was also actually in Western Sydney, in the flood region, dealing with the floods herself. And so one of the things I said to the editor was, put that at the top. It's important for a reader to know that, I mean, this is based on academic knowledge, but the fact that this person's also got first-hand experience of these events, is actually living through them currently, it adds a sense of immediacy that's quite powerful. And it is part of the things that make that person a credible authority, is not just they've got the academic knowledge, but also they know it from a first-hand sort of perspective. Okay. Just very quickly, so the life cycle is you pitch, we agree on a brief, I've talked about that, you write and file your draft. We've got a really good editing system that you'll file your draft in. It's got a button that says that we can't publish until you approve the final version. That's how we make sure we don't introduce mistakes. And basically, they're sort of the key parts of the process, apart from, obviously, at the end, once the piece is published, there are a few more things that we do that you probably need to be aware of. One of which is we do talk to our republishing partners at different media outlets about your piece and say, there's this strong piece, it's doing this, it's doing that, would you be interested in it? We also do quite a bit of social media around your work. And increasingly what we're doing is trying to package up content from academics in ways to reach audiences outside just the articles themselves. Well, we always used to think of social media as a way of advertising content, so that you would put something on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok so that you could get people to read the article. But increasingly we're realising that there are so many audiences that are hanging out on these different platforms who are actually not necessarily going to come back and read the article, but can get really good high quality content if they encounter it on those platforms. So a lot of our coronavirus coverage, we produce really strong social media tiles to give people really good quality information from academic experts, and we're doing that more and more. So that's some of the work that happens after your piece is published.
A question around headlines.
Sure.
are they written as part of that initial draft that you file, or is that something that the editor works?
The editor writes the headline. Again, you get final approval, so you get a right of objection. But what we do is with the headlines, we have an editorial group on a channel called Slack, where basically there's 6 or 7 editors. And so every story, somebody will write a headline, and then we'll have this process where we'll sort of work it as a group. So it'll be like, that's not good, can we do that? That's not good, can we do that? And we'll try to make it as sharp as possible. And we're weighing a few things. With headlines, you don't want to be clickbaity, so that's where you pretend the story is saying something it's not going to say. You want the headline to actually accurately reflect what the story is going to say. You want the headline to talk to readers the way that a normal person would talk. So take our shark drumline story, why shark drumlines are a bad idea is, it's a bit flat, but it's a perfectly good headline in a way because it tells you exactly what the story is saying and it talks in normal language. Bad idea is the way a human being would talk. Not, why shark drum nets are suboptimal is not as good a headline because people don't use the word suboptimal, for example. So you're trying to use ordinary language. But you're also trying to have a little bit of verve and energy and playfulness sometimes in their headline. So it's best, the best way we've found of creating the best possible headlines is this sort of group editing process where everyone works on them together. But then it's always back to the academic and you've always got the right to object. And if you object, we go back to the drawing board until there's something that you're comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, we don't want something that you think is going to misrepresent your piece. Now, I'm just aware of time and I want to give more time for questions, so I'll just try to rush through this. So you can see, that's our editing interface. See this thing here on the right, this readability index? We've got this thing called the Flesch-Kincaid index, and basically what it does is it counts up how many words in a sentence, how many syllables in most words you're using, how you've structured your language, and it gives us a rating from red to it's very, very prolix, it's very technical, to green, where it's really clear. And green is pitched at the level of a 16-year-old. So we're trying to pitch at the reading level of an educated 16-year-old. And that's a way that you can reach a wide audience. So we'll work with you on that, but we basically work through it. And you can see often on the stories there'll be 2 or 3 editors that will work on it, and they'll be doing different things. One might be working on the multimedia, one might be working on the copy, one might be helping with the headline, for example. There's a bit of a process that happens there. I just explained the readability index, so that's good. So just have a quick look at this. This is an example of 2 pictures. Has everybody read them both? Can anybody tell me which one's better?
One on the right.
Why?
Because it's short, it's sharp. You get the gist immediately. It's about your cat and dog.
Yep. Anybody else? Anybody else got any thoughts on why the one on the right succeeds more?
There's technical language in the
Yeah, technical language in the one on the left. Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, you had something?
Yeah, uses words that people understand.
Yep. Sorry, at the back there. Yeah.
It goes to why it matters.
That's the key thing. It goes to why it matters. What's at stake? I know what's at stake there. I've sort of got some idea what's at stake there, to be honest. You can sort of get it, but it's nowhere near as compelling what's at stake as the one on the right. So you had something?
Yeah, the concrete is the 500 dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Specificity.
That's right, because the other thing you've got to think about, again, is when people read, they read in pictures. They read in things that they can visualise, which is why the technical language, say this ectoparasite, I can't visualise an ectoparasite. I don't know what it looks like. I've never seen one. I've never, Whereas if you're talking about a tick, like I've got some idea at least. I'm not sure I can visualise a tick that well either, but, I've got some idea what they look like. Okay. Just something to say. I'm just going to try to wrap up now, but we do get far more pictures than we can accept. It's an unfortunate consequence of success, and we've only got a small team that we get hundreds of pictures every week, and we reject probably somewhere around about 70 to 80% of them. So as academics, I know you're all used to pitching and being rejected in journals and other processes as well, so you are probably familiar with it. It doesn't make it fun, and it's not fun for us either when we have to reject pieces. The thing I would encourage you to do is don't be discouraged by rejections, and always pitch again. Somebody asked a question before about us changing our deadlines and accepting pieces and then saying, actually, we've got something else on. It happens all the time. It is a really dynamic, moving environment. And sometimes you're just going to be unlucky. That topic's been covered, 2 weeks before and there's not much interest. It might even be that the editor you pitched to is grumpy. They've had a bad day. Things aren't working. They had a bad experience with a particular topic, whatever else. Things are changing all the time. So the best thing to do is, if you don't succeed with a pitch, but you do think it's important work, try reworking it a little bit and try again. If you have a pitch that gets rejected a couple of times and you're really struggling and you think it's got merit, I'd encourage you to go to your media team and they'll be able to help you. You can also contact me or Susan Hornbeck here, who's our University Relations Manager, and she often helps us as well with where if people are having difficulties getting through. Any process of filtering is going to be imperfect. So there are human beings making decisions. There's basically 25 editors. They do their best. Sometimes they reject pitches that they shouldn't. So it's always worth coming to me or coming to somebody else if you do struggle. But it's also worth just being aware that you probably need to pitch a few times to be successful, and unsuccessful pitches are part of the process. It's just unfortunately unavoidable. I might, because I know we're sort of almost out of time, I might try to see if I can finish there. Yeah, I'll just leave room for any more questions. You've asked some great questions through the presentation. Does anybody else have any more questions that they wanted to ask? Yep.
Thanks, Misha. You talked about authors largely in the singular. Do you have a particular view about co-authorship as a good idea or a bad idea?
I can tell you the editors hate it. And they particularly hate it when they're working on a piece and suddenly somebody says, I've got 27 co-authors. Because then you've got to basically go through, put them all in the system, negotiate the relationship. It can get very complicated in terms of permissions and approvals, and it adds a lot to the process. So I know academics like to work in a collaborative way. The thing I would say as a practical matter is our preference is to keep co-authors down to about 3 or 4 maximum if you can. Working with co-authors is fine, it's really smart, and it can be really good, and people can bring different knowledge to a piece. But too many and it becomes writing by committee and it doesn't work. The other thing that's really good if you're going to have a lot of co-authors is to elect one to be the representative of the group and to be the one to approve the copy. Because if you're an editor and you're trying to negotiate with 4 or 5 co-authors and they're going in and rewriting bits, it's not workable. Yeah. Any other questions? Yep.
Have you ever done a series of articles on an umbrella topic?
Yes, we do series quite a bit. We've been doing it less recently. We've been a little bit more driven by the news agenda, but we do want to go back to it. So at the moment we're doing a big series on disaster and disadvantage, which is around bushfire and flood and those types of issues. We did a couple of big series last year. We did one about Cook, we did one about biodiversity recovery after the bushfires. And we've done some big ones on, say, wealth and inequality in Australia. So we try to pick up big issues and themes at times. But it really sort of, it's one of those things that we sort of do reasonably organically depending on what's in the news agenda. So we've got a big meeting actually of the editors this Friday where we're going to talk about some of those things that we'll be looking at over the coming year. Yep. Any other questions? Yep.
I just had a question for Ed actually about the workflow. Are you happy for us to direct the conversation about academics on or would you prefer that the academics go to ACE or their college meeting teams first and play the pitch?
So, good pick up. I wouldn't have you to pitch, Olivia, but for our academics, absolutely. No, go direct. Your colleges don't have media teams, they have communications teams, so they shouldn't be talking to media. Our guys can definitely help with media, but the conversation is there, they can do it. Same as if you're a academic pitching to a newspaper, we don't need to get involved. What's useful is to know. So as Misha said, it's great if we know what's coming. So let's say a piece gets begun of a conversation and the journalist sees the name and calls the media team. If they've had a heads up the day before, they know who to look for. So that's really helpful. But no, we don't need to get in the way of that process. But we're happy to help and happy to give guidance. But no, the conversation, like any other op-ed placement, you can do yourself.
Great. Yep.
Do you ever face legal challenges, like defamation cases, things like that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we've been sued a few times. I've been sued a few times. It's tricky because we're a small organisation. So one of the things that you need with defamation laws in Australia being the way they are is you need deep pockets and a lot of resources to fight defamation cases. And we're somewhat constrained, so we have to be very careful. One of the biggest, most difficult ones, just to give you a little bit of a story, was we used to have this sort of product called Research Check, where we'd basically check claims about research, and we had one which was also about pharmaceutical products. And there was this new drug that was produced for people with celiacs to act sort of as a prophylactic to stop them upsetting their digestive system. And we had an academic that wrote a piece saying it didn't work. And this company that had invested millions of dollars in this product sued us, claiming that it had destroyed their whole business. And the difficulty was that if we stood by the academic, the piece was fine. But if we didn't settle that, we risked a long-standing legal dispute that then could have crippled us. So we did have to negotiate a settlement where we backed down on a few little things and tried to work our way through. But yeah, defamation laws in this country are very difficult and it's very complicated, and we do get sued. The good thing is we do have terrific legal representation. One of our lawyers is, one of our board members is Richard Leader, who's a partner in Cause, which is one of the better defamation law firms in Australia. And we get everything that we think there's a legal issue with legal before publication. Yep.
How do you fund your operation?
How we fund it? Okay, yeah, it's a good question. It costs around about $5 million a year to run, and about half of that comes from the unis. So 39 public universities in Australia, they all pay an annual fee, and that covers about half our costs. The rest we get from philanthropy. Some big philanthropic organisations provide some money to us, like the Paul Ramsay Foundation, Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, Ian Potter Foundation. And the rest we get really from donors, individual donors. There's around about 20,000 people who gave money to the conversation last year, just readers who value what we do, who love having access to the work that you all do, and are really passionate about the idea of a better informed public discourse, and they provide money to support our work. And at the moment, that looks like a really quite sustainable business model. That sort of is the way we're going forward. We've also got, it's a little bit complicated in Australia because the conversation grew out of Australia, and we've also got all the other global teams, and they do provide some money back to us to help with the digital technology platform and those sorts of things. But, yeah. Anything else?
So what would be best to pitch in when your article, for instance, if you have an academic article coming out, so when it's about to come out, or for instance, when you just submitted it, but it's like timely at this stage, so is that fine?
I would probably, if you want it hooked to the article itself, if you want to use the contents of the article, I would pitch a couple of weeks before it's about to be published so that we can work with you to coincide with publication, because we'll link. And one of the things, if we publish at the same time the article comes out, is it'll drive citation of the article as well, because we're like a public media, so basically people will read it and go, I might want to read that article. So that's really useful for you. If you're wanting to use the expertise that you've deployed in that article to talk about something in the news, but you're not sort of actually publishing the contents of the article, then you can do it at any time.
Oh.
Yep. Anybody else? Yep.
If an article's developed with your assistance, but then can the author re-pitch it to another news chain, and if they get it, published, do you have a problem with that?
We'd expect you to tell us, but apart from that, no. I mean, it's your work, effectively. So if for some reason we decide not to run it, then really it's your intellectual property and you can do with it what you want. But we would want to know. There have been a couple of instances, very rare, but over the years, a couple of instances where we've worked on a piece and then discovered it was pitched somewhere else or something else has happened, and that's sort of, it's difficult for the editors if they don't know what's going on. But as long as you keep us in the loop, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. We might wrap up there. So just going back to what I started with, I'm trying to remember for myself. There's always a hook. Never disembark a vehicle if you can get out of a car, and work with your media team. They're the really key three things. Just if you can remember those, you'll be doing great. I think we're going to have a drink, which is terrific, because I'm going to hang around. If anyone wants to talk about their research or pitch anything or have a chat, we're all going to hang around for a bit to do that, I think, as well. So, excellent. And thank you very much for inviting us. It's been terrific. Did you want to say anything more at the end? Or? Okay. Great.
Thanks, Misha. That was great.
Thank you. Thanks.
Best of all, I could agree with all of it, so that's really helpful. So thank you so much for coming. Everyone, just to say again, speak to the conversation, speak to my team. We're here to help you. You know, we all exist to help tell these stories. Universities are wonderful places to do jobs like mine because they're just full of good stories. And that's, I think, what part of the philosophy behind the conversation as well is you've got access to great stories that are really, really interesting to the public. So please do keep writing, do keep looking for ways to communicate your work. Let us know how we can help, and stay for a drink.